So, I am now recording. We're discussing chapter 11 of Politeness in Professional Contexts. Recent publication, John Benjamin's, on judicial questioning, how context shapes facework strategies. Anybody like to kick off?
It's always me. It's always me. I want someone else to kick off this time.
Well, I was just going to ask. Karen Tracey is somebody I sort of kind of associate with kind of conversation analysis-y kind of stuff. Is that fair?
I think it's more the American Communication School.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rather than CAS per se.
Right. Okay. But that kind of very detailed approach.
Yeah. Although,
well, in some ways, yeah, no, yeah, but a bit different.
Not as detailed as I would have wanted, to be honest. But anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, certain things that they were picked upon. They're kind of, yeah, I found interesting. I mean, I quite enjoyed it as a paper, although I always find this tension with papers that you're thinking, yeah, but that's like 2 fragments of data, you know. How do I know that's representative? I mean, you know, that's always my, and I know, I suppose at one level, but she's making claims for representativeness of these kind of these 2 groupings that she identifies. The group, the judge, well, particularly I think it's in the second type of hearings, which involve the public. You have to kind of distinguish between those who treat it as a standard courtroom and those who treat it as a minor kind of more where the judge as inquisitor.
More like the
European system of kind of that the judge.
I'm not actually familiar with European small claims courts, but yeah. Anyway.
Well, no, but just the judge, just the system in general. So the UK and the US are relatively rare in having juries. In a lot of countries in the world, essentially, you put all your stuff forward to the judge, and the judge does the questioning, and the judge makes the decision. So it works called the inquisitorial model.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I mean, this data is all US, so it isn't the standard model yet. But yeah, it's like the judge is acting as making as them taking on the role, you know, the response, you know, that they embody the law essentially, as compared to the other one where it's kind of more. Yeah, sort of. It's kind of a bit more distance from the law, or it's not quite such obvious.
More Judge Judy style.
Yeah, and much more informal language. Yeah, much more kind of appeal to kind of common sense sort of stuff.
Yeah, common sense judgments. Yeah, yeah.
Which I thought was interesting, but it'd be interesting to know, because you know, among the question is well, you know, does that to make that to be very certain about that kind of distinction? I'd want to see very similar cases that were played out in very different ways under the judges that she had identified, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But, you know,
I wonder if she was relying on, I mean, she did say that the small claims stuff is recent or current research, whereas the appellate court is old stuff. And I wonder if she was kind of, perhaps not explicitly enough, but, you know, relying on earlier analyses of that.
Right, okay, yeah, it's possible.
But having said that, I didn't think that but I mean, yeah, you've only got limited space as well. I mean,
yeah, of course, and I just find that, you know, sometimes I just find that frustrating.
It's less than 20 pages, and there's quite big claims to make
on that basis.
Yeah.
I mean, part of me perhaps would have preferred to see just focusing on the one, you know, one of those groups, either the appellate data or the other data.
Yeah, and do a more, perhaps a more detailed thing of the small claims, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think in some senses that was, although I mean, I found the appellate one interesting. You know, that idea that face what, you know, didn't seem to be in play in the way that you would perhaps normally expect. because that there wasn't much attempt to sort of redress face and those kind of things. So that's kind of interesting to know about. But in terms of how different people choose to do things, which is often of interest to us, then the small claims things looks potentially more interesting because you've got people with if you like, the same task but approaching it in different ways. So yeah, but yeah, I mean that's obviously hypothetical, but
and different again from the Soto hearing, which is a different judicial context and different behaviours.
Yeah.
There is at least one table with numbers in there, isn't there? If you want representativeness. But yeah, okay, it just says more words, less words and things like that, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to demonstrate the difference in style between the judges in a way, isn't it?
I agree. It would have been better to concentrate on perhaps one excerpt, because I found myself sometimes writing down, well, okay, here's a claim. Where is your evidence for this in the data?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it is there. The fact that she says at one stage, the absence of politeness tokens frames the judge as rude.
Yeah.
Well, okay, show us an example of that, And
also that the defendants felt disrespected, and that
exactly. That was the other one.
Anywhere. Yeah. So it was,
and
quite frustrating.
This is quite important because of the framework that she set up, where you have identity work at the top, and then you have face work as one aspect of identity work and politeness as one aspect of face work, Yeah, and I would have thought the obvious thing was to say, okay, if you're going to talk about people feeling disrespected, then we need some evidence of that. Perhaps this has happened because is there actually a very speaker-oriented way of treating this data? I think, that is to say, the identity work and the face work and the politeness refer to what the speaker does rather than how it's received by recipients, by hearers, I reckon. Does that make sense?
Yeah, she doesn't say so much about how. I mean, I think there's a little bit in the appellate course stuff about the other barristers not taking offence or being interrupted and things like that. So there was some reference to take up there in terms of simultaneous speech, but I don't think there was much elsewhere.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, she talks about giving support to the discursive approach to politeness. I found it a bit muddled or muddling, really, because I liked that framework, that you mentioned, Jim. I thought it was interesting about the relationship between face and identity and all that kind of thing. But then she seems to use quite a Brown and Levinson in some places, strictly Brown and Levinson assessment of politeness practices, but then at the end claims to be supporting a discursive approach without having looked at responses. So I was a bit confused, to be honest, as to how she was analysing the data.
I think the claim there, and I suppose you could say this is an example of it, is at least it demonstrates the need to look beyond the single utterance,
Oh yeah. I think that is.
Like,
oh yeah, that
sequencing.
Yeah, it made the point about sequence, but it's like, I mean, part of me thought, you're a bit late to be making that point about, in terms of discursive stuff. I mean that's probably goes back 10 years.
He finishes off with this section 5 on using context, which kind of she introduces right at the beginning in the introduction. Then she and it's almost as if maybe it would have been better to have section 5 as part of the literature review or before the data analysis, I don't know. I just felt it wasn't quite in the right place, or it was almost a bit of an add-on to, you know, oh, well, I've said I'll talk about context, so.
I did find it a little bit, a bit odd, because it was like, you know, there wasn't really kind of it wasn't represented as a discussion, if you like.
No.
You know, so yeah, you wouldn't expect new material to be kind of added, you know, here in some senses. You know, it's what we tell our students, isn't it? You don't introduce new stuff in the discussion.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of the unevidenced claims seem to occur for me as well.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I feel like I should shut up and let somebody else say something.
Extra guilty now for not having quite finished it, since it seems like a lot of the interesting stuff seems to be in the later half. I only got up to, let's see, 262. One thing I wondered was in the bit where she's talking about communicators' professional face wants, depending on the aims of a particular depending on the aims that a particular institution most privileges. Immediately what sprang to mind for me was the author-animator principle distinction that Goffman makes, and I wondered if anyone else thought that was...
She does mention that somewhere.
No, she talks about that.
Does she talk about it later in the bit I haven't read?
Well, you know, she talks about the, you know, that kind of distinction between the two types of judge, as the one who's taking responsibility as being the author, as well as the as being the principal, as well as the animator and author. Whereas in the second group, she says that they're only claiming to be sort of author and animator, not principal.
Yeah.
So she does have that footing.
Which is an interesting point. I think that's a point well made, really. You know, the connection between the particular kind of context, the institutional context, and identity and face maintenance, which, you know, I've found in other people in medical contexts as well. It's, you know, you're not really representing yourself so much as the institution or the profession even.
That's just below where I've read up to. Oh, well, at least I had a correct idea.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, and also, you know, that kind of is increasingly present in academia. I think, particularly, I think there's much compared to when I joined academia. There's a much more idea of, you know, if you're out there in the world, that you're a representative of your university. You know, both in other academic contexts, other academic contexts and non-academic context. You know, so there's that kind of that idea is much more present than it was, I think.
I think you're right. Yeah.
I don't like it either, but yeah.
I feel bad for Huddersfield then if they've seen my Twitter account.
Oh yeah, you want to be careful there, Liz. You might be hauled over the coals.
This is the thing where we all find ourselves having to be careful.
Yeah.
Say this is very distressing, you know. Did other people, you mentioned, Karen, using the sort of Brown and Levinson framework, did other people find the same thing as me, that the mentions she makes of positive face and negative face just don't do it for me? They just don't seem very helpful. And having brought up professional face, which, by the way, she wrongly attributes to Archer and Jagodinski. It was Rosina who first came up with that, I think.
Well, they use it, but yeah, they didn't first use it.
No, I'm not blaming them, but that's she says introduced by them.
Does she? Right, yeah. I missed that. Yeah.
But you know, she mentions that, and I find myself once again thinking, here's an example of the sort of Procrusteanism that I'm always telling my students to avoid. You introduce them to the concepts of positive and negative face, and then they feel they've got to sort of stuff everything into either the positive face or the negative face box. And that there was aspects of what you might call professional face, moral face, or something more general in terms of, well, she mentions Lyman Bowers. although she doesn't actually mention competence phase, which is Limon-Bowers, isn't it? I think, you know. But okay, why not use that? I just felt the particular mentions of or instances of effects or positive face work, negative face work, didn't work for me at all, you know.
Yeah.
And you know that the thing you sometimes get where negative face work because somebody is being asked, or you know their freedom of action is restricted because they've got to respond. Come on, you know. Well, I just don't find that helpful, you know.
Yeah. In general, I felt that it wasn't so much that it was that there were times when she was saying that, I think she was making a point early on that the appellate judges actually, or legal professionals in general, don't actually use much politeness at all. And then she gives excerpt 1. She gives an example, and I found at least 2 instances of what I would call politeness in there. And I wondered if what she was meaning, I then got the feeling that what she was meaning by politeness was things like please and thank you, because she then goes on to talk about politeness tokens and then only talks about please and thank you as if they are the only politeness tokens.
Yeah.
And also that discussion, I'm trying to find where it was. Oh, it was page 263. I found that excerpt 5 was in that respect was kind of, oh yeah, that discussion of please and thank you, it was quite under-analysed as well, in that please, okay, you can call please a politeness token, but actually when you look at it in context, which is what, surely that's what she's talking about. She's looking at talk in context. The please quite often adds to the emphatic nature of a directive. So you could question whether it is in fact politeness.
Well, I think her point there, and this was a point that I did find it intriguing, well, you know, worth making. I think she makes at the top of page 253, is that what lawyers or attorneys, she calls them, of course, often do is frame their questions as if they were not gratuitous face attack, where in fact they are. And that's the point, I think, about the politeness tokens and formal address she mentions as well. You know? And I get, you know, that's interesting. That's worth exploring more in a way, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
You know? I was thinking, you know, could you link it to, say, you know, Culpepper's 1996 off-record impoliteness, you know, the sarcasm. Well, it isn't quite the same thing as sarcasm, but I suppose it's the same sort of idea, isn't it?
Well, those, I mean, it did strike me that when she was talking about that use of, I think it was extracts 6 and 7, when she was talking about the places where you got this use of politeness phenomena, that they were all, they were framing, they weren't part of the main work of the talk. They were kind of, you know, they were in the sort of sequences of getting people started, if you know, getting people settled and getting people started, rather than actually the business of the court. And I thought it was, you know, and that wasn't commented on. I mean, whether those are the only, you know, whether it's just accidental that those only come from those segments, I don't know. But it did strike me as potentially interesting that was the case, that was something you did in the kind of the liminal parts of the.
Yeah, and she says it's because, she's claiming that it's because they're with a lay person. It's the judge telling or organising the lay actors to do what they're supposed to do in that context.
And may I ask a question? When she says that, you know, formal address is polite, is it really polite in this context? It's just formal address. which the context necessitates. I mean, does it show politeness?
I mean, if you're talking about sort of relation work, you'd call it politic, really, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that kind, or I don't know, just formality because of the context rather than, you know, a politeness token. I don't know. I mean,
I agree.
Well, it's politeness in a Brown and Levinson sense, isn't it? In that it sort of
negative politeness. Okay,
keeps distance. Yeah.
But
and I suppose, you know, but perhaps you could call it identity work. You know, as you say, it's the kind of formality that's expected in that context. So when it is used, it is the judge or maybe the lawyers enacting their professional identity in some way. But yeah, I don't, you know, there's nothing especially polite about it. I agree. I mean, in a first order sense, there's nothing polite about it. You know, I don't think, is there?
Its lack would be impolite, is more the
that's true.
The point.
Yeah, which is why you said politic. Yeah, exactly.
In a first order sense, people would say it's polite in a first order sense as well.
Yes, that's true. That's true. But I mean,
first order, I think it would be considered polite, but but second order. But because it is, I think it, well, okay, to my, for, you know, as somebody who's involved in the norms of my society and therefore speaking as a you know, as that sort of lay perspective, I expect my title to be used when appropriate, and not to use it I would find offensive.
Yeah.
And that I would consider, though I would consider it be polite for people to use my title when they are expected to do so.
Not in the marked sense of what's there, obviously, you know.
No, but I was saying first.
That's polite.
First order politeness.
I get you. Yes.
So second order, absolutely. I think politic or maybe even non-polite, possibly.
It's true
but either way, not salient. Its omission would be salient. So, you know, I mean, of all the kind of institutional interactions that any of us might take part in, I think courtroom is one of the most structured and precise on requirements. I mean, okay, you could say probably Parliament is as well, but then not, you know, not many of us are going to end up in that particular context, whereas any of us could end up in a court of law at some point. Hopefully not, but. So it's sort of, I think it's something we have, well, probably because we see so much of it in things like TV and film and so forth, that we have an idea of what it's like, even if we haven't personally experienced it.
I mean, I suppose you'd call it ritual in a way, isn't there? That
absolutely.
It appears to be an institutional context where procedure should be, many aspects of procedure have to be followed to the letter, or, you know, to the word or whatever.
Well, you know, your honour, I mean, you know, very precise, isn't it? I mean, it's not even. Even judge, so it's you know, it's very precise on what terms are required for you to fulfill, for it to be I suppose, you know, it's quite, I mean, ritual is quite speech act theory, really, isn't it? You know, if you don't do those things, then the utterance misfires.
Just like I say, I don't want the usual suspects to dominate the discussion. Vito, was there anything that you wanted to contribute at this point, or Hassan? Is he still there?
Oh, it says connecting to audio on my screen, so it looks like he's still having issues.
Are you sure you've let him in? Do you see what I mean?
Well, we wouldn't be able to see anything of him if he hadn't been let in.
Yeah, Athens just, don't know whether he can hear us, but we can't see him.
or if he's trying to speak, we can't hear him.
Okay.
I think it was interesting, I suppose, about this context, that she makes the point at one stage that it makes something along the lines of it makes Facework non-reciprocal because of the context. You know, I mean the sort of default assumption that, you know, in supporting my face, I support your face and vice versa. But the idea, she says somewhere, I'm afraid, I think it may be 253 or 254, that in effect, because of this context, me doing self-face work involves other face attack and vice versa. I think that's quite an interesting point.
So can you point at that, Jim?
I'll give it a go.
There is a,
253, I reckon it was 253.
It's at the bottom of 253, where number 4, Facework. Is it in there?
That's kind of just, Brown and Levinson-y.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it must be a little bit further on, I think.
She says identity work is two-sided.
Oh, maybe, and I didn't bother to make that distinction. Yes.
Well, each communicative move both presents self as a certain kind of person and frames the addressed other as a particular kind of person. So she's just saying for identity work as for Facework. She's saying that identity work is
it fits very, it kind of aligns very neatly with Goffman's idea of face, doesn't it?
That's it. I found it's at the top of, near the top of 254 actually, just after point 5, and you get that paragraph beginning in contrast. The third sentence says, but as is true in just about all professional roles, one facet of the judge role may find itself in tension with another, thereby leading a judge to engage in face attack. I think that's what I picked up on, perhaps wrongly.
As judges, question defendants making guilty pleas.
So in other words, so they're not always just overseeing what's going on, that they can have a more active role. And if they do, then it can be, they can kind of take on the role of the attorneys in potentially face attacking. That's not about reciprocal versus non-reciprocal, though.
No, perhaps I've got it wrong. Yeah. Other thing, I mean, given that this is about asking judicial questions in this context, and that Facework is in the air, I suppose I'm speaking as a pragmatician here. No mention of presupposition at all. When did you stop beating your wife? That kind of thing.
Doesn't that get mentioned somewhere?
No, it got mentioned in the Goffman chapter we're going to read.
Oh, okay, that's what I'm thinking of. I know I've read it somewhere. Okay.
Yeah. And I would have expected it to come up, but again, as it turns out, that I suppose it's an indication of the fact that the examples of the excerpt, the excerpts themselves, are not examined very closely.
No.
But then certainly a lot of politeness work doesn't look at stuff like presuppositions anyway. I mean, I might, but but that's my CDA side coming through.
Well, may I summarize? Well, to tell you the truth, I was disappointed by this chapter because I I have a very high regard for this author. And you know, I think, for example, I think that concept of reasonable hostility that she articulated in the Journal of Politeness Research in 2008 is terribly important. And she does make a brief reference to it here, but not very pertinently, actually. You know?
Yeah, and she also mentions polite incivility as well, doesn't she?
Oh yes, yeah, polite incivility. Yes, I'd like to know more about that, but maybe not here. And I just, and you know, I hate to be a pedant, you know, but there was a kind of, yeah, but I'm going to be. Obviously, I like it really. Things like, right, one of the references is wrong. I mean, I noticed that because it's the chapter written by her and somebody else for our Language and Conflict book. And it's supposedly edited by Jim O'Driscoll and Leslie Jeffries. And actually it was edited by Matthew Evans, Leslie Jeffries and Jim O'Driscoll. You know, it seems a shame that Matt didn't get a mention, you know.
But you know, sorry.
Even
you know what happened, probably what happened, because I've seen that elsewhere in other references. And I think what has happened is that at the very beginning, what you circulated was not including Matt. Yeah. So people made a note of that, and then they didn't bother to check again, I think. Because I've seen
I mean, hang on a minute. Isn't it true, Maria, that all authors who contributed got a hard copy of the book?
That's true, but you know what? We may sometimes make a reference to our own work, you know, a sort of tentative reference, and then we don't bother to check. I don't know, but I've seen it. Because I do a lot of editing, as you know.
As I don't, but should. But yeah.
I
Okay.
was about to back you up with that. But the other thing I've seen literally twice in the last 2 weeks is I saw quotes to things that I was a bit like, I don't think that's quite right. And then I Googled the quote verbatim around it, and I found that the only place that the quote was supposedly from someone else's work. Okay, so someone was making a reference to someone else's work, and I thought that seems a bit off. So I Googled it, and the only place I could find those verbatim references were in other publications by that same author. And I've seen that twice now. So people replicate their own mistakes. If it hasn't been caught in an earlier article by an editor who's really like eagle-eyed, then they will think that's correct, and they'll just go, oh, I'm sure I referenced such a person in that article I wrote 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I can really see that happening. Yeah,
exact same quote.
This is what
the same mistakes exactly.
Yeah. This is what famously happens.
Week, I've pulled up authors and said, you know what, this quote doesn't exist in the literature, let alone by that author. Like, this is a nonsense quote. You're the only person who's ever written this.
Yes. Good one. Yeah.
So yeah, this sort
That's
of thing does happen.
matter.
And also my references for my article, my chapter in this same book are really messed up, and it wasn't really anyone's fault that happened. So maybe the same sort of problem happened with Karen Tracey. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed a misspelling of somebody's name, but you know,
my references are a mess, and they've been published.
So what happened there, Liz?
Well, okay, it wasn't Piotr's fault, so I don't want this to seem like it was his fault, but it was entirely my fault. In fact, it was 100% my fault. I somehow had not noticed the instructions on how to format references to the style that it book. So I had not done that when I'd submitted my corrected proof to Piotr.
Right.
And I had spoken to Piotr before about, at that time in my academic life, having no library access because I wasn't employed anywhere. And he very sweetly and nicely thought, she doesn't have library access, therefore she can't correct her own references to the correct styling, therefore I'm going to attempt to do it for her, which was a really sweet, generous, nice thing. And I don't want that to be misconstrued. But unfortunately, some things got garbled in his attempt to reformat them in the correct styling. And therefore they went to the typesetters like that. And then when I received from the typesetters my article, I was like, oh God, what's happened to my references? They look horrible. And I literally could have clicked one button because I use Mendeley. So all I would have had to do was click reformat to MLA or whatever it was from APA, and it would have just gone and done them perfectly. But then I needed to go back to the typesetters and say, no, actually the references should look like this. And somehow when they were published, some things were still wrong. But like if Piotr had asked me, it looks like you forgot to reformat your references, could you just do that? I literally could have clicked one button. But in his generosity, he accidentally created work for both of us. But that wasn't his fault. He was trying to do a nice thing. But yeah, so sorry about my references.
So the lesson is make sure you read the stuff about how to format references.
Yeah, I don't know how I even missed that. Somehow I just didn't even
I find it quite therapeutic, actually, just kind of going
entirely through. My own, it was a problem of my own creation, 100%. So yeah, my reference is also not perfect.
So, sorry, I was going to say, so was this originally part of the Manchester conference, this talk?
Karen Tracey's, you mean?
Yeah, yes, because it wasn't, didn't this volume come out of that?
It did for me.
There was it was kind of indirectly it did, but I don't know whether she actually delivered this paper because there was a special issue of the journal came out of the Manchester, and those were the papers that they chose from the Manchester conference. And then I think kind of Dawn and I at the same time had the idea to publish a volume, and Dawn sort of said, oh well, or we both sort of said, if there are any papers that didn't get into the special issue, we could ask if people want to get into the book, but it's not exclusively those. So there was some got in, like mine, for example, that weren't at the Manchester conference. Yeah, that's a very long and boring discussion about this particular publication, but I think
I found it quite interesting to read. I thought there was enough in it. I mean, given it was a relatively short paper, it didn't take me. I mean, it was actually a fairly quick read, I have to say.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Well, it only justified me sitting outside for 40 minutes, which I was quite upset about yesterday afternoon. I could have done with a good hour.
40 minutes. Oh, you make me feel so slow.
Maybe I didn't read it.
Much slower.
No, but I mean, other ones can take, easily. I mean, I would normally expect to take an hour at least to read whatever we're reading, but this was a relatively short paper. It went. I read it fairly quickly. I probably could have read it more carefully, to be fair.
There's a lot of sort of pointing in the direction of other work on courtroom discussions that I thought was useful, and I could probably use it with teaching and students, because a lot of them, would be interested, particularly like if anybody wants to do Judge Judy, analysis of Judge Judy and that kind of thing.
I mean, I don't think you've got it in your library, but there's a nice textbook by Coulthard, Johnson and somebody else, a forensic linguistics textbook, which would cover that kind of stuff.
Is that right?
Yeah, because I mean, I know a bit about it because I've co-supervised now a couple of PhD theses with Alison Johnson, and that's her specialist is legal discourse. So it's how I found out about, the different systems. And
it is really interesting. I find it courtroom interaction.
Well, I mean, because there's a whole literature there about different types of questions and what they're used for.
That was the other thing that I found frustrating. I mean, I agree with Jim. I was disappointed. I had high hopes for this chapter. I thought it would be a bit more interesting than I actually found.
Well, yeah, I was expecting more on the questions from the
from the title. It sounded like it was going to be about questions mainly.
Yeah, which I would find quite attractive.
It wasn't really. She made some claims about questions and sequence, but they weren't really demonstrated.
No,
that was kind of disappointing, really. I wanted to see more examples of these questions and how they evolve over time. Because she makes a claim about looking at a sequence of questions, but then it's not really demonstrated earlier on in the text. Yeah. So
no, I mean, there's some really interesting literature out there on lots of different types. So I mean, you can get a certain amount in Quirk et al. On types of questions, but there's also a much broader literature within the, so in terms of courtroom questioning, but also
obviously courtrooms are a great context for looking at questions.
Yeah, well, but also questioning of suspects within police stations. That's where
also
on this is. So what kind of questions are used and why they're used, because I mean particularly because it's often questions are asked in those contexts, actually particularly in more inquisitorial contexts, because that's where you present the case to the judge, is via the questions you ask of a suspect in interview. So yeah, there's a whole really interesting literature out there on that, and I know a little bit about it kind of secondhand via supervising these PhD students. So yeah, as well as finding out about different practices. Yeah, so at the moment I'm co-supervising with Alison one on Nigerian police interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And so very interesting to kind of find out about. But yeah, I find that questioning stuff really interesting. Now I suppose I was hoping when we were picking, that's what I thought the focus was going to be on.
Yeah, me too.
I suppose that's one of the issues, I suppose, with edited volumes, isn't it? You don't have an abstract to read to kind of assess what the paper's really about. You only have the title to go on.
Yeah, about the questions, maybe I'm being a bit dense here, but I noted down from extract 1 or excerpt 1 that, for example, turn 1 seems to be designated a question just because it elicits a response. And then, and I'm thinking, okay, turns 3 and 7 apparently are also questions. Yeah, well, yeah, the only difference is between that and turn 1 is there's an explicit invitation for the next person to speak. What do you have to say to that kind of thing? But otherwise, they're exactly the same. And I thought I didn't know. By then, I thought I'm not quite sure what a question is in this word. What qualifies as a question?
Yeah, no, it's a fair point, actually. Yeah. And especially in what is essentially dialogic discourse, what are you going to do, really? Somebody stops talking, it's your turn to start talking, isn't it? To any utterance, you're probably expected to respond. Basic adjacency pair stuff, isn't it?
It says in this footnote, footnote 6 on page 260, a questioning term was defined as a judge utterance to which a response was given.
Yeah.
So that, well, yeah. In that case, it means anything the judge says which is not a summing up, or a summing up, or
an instruction.
An instruction, yes.
Yeah. Would you come close to the mic? Which is essentially it's a sort of slightly polite instruction, isn't it?
Yeah. So, in other words, a judge utterance to which a verbal response was given. Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly, because there's still a response there, isn't it? And I did kind of note that at the time. But yeah, I mean, I suppose, arguably a lot of what's said in courtrooms is question answer. So it's probably less problematic than it might be in other contexts, but still. But yeah, there was no, but then they didn't really do anything with the idea of questions here. It was more focus on, were there, okay, so, sort of, were there politeness phenomena going on there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which it's kind of irrelevant to whether it's a question or not.
Yeah.
So in some senses, if you like, I don't think the overall basis of what she talked about is affected by that problematic definition, but it's not actually really about questioning.
No.
I would imagine, but I don't know, that there's some term in CA to define what she is actually talking about. Does anybody know it?
I'm not, well, yeah, I'm sure your knowledge of CA is better than mine, Jim.
No, it isn't.
Well, mine is pretty, mine doesn't go beyond.
I'll try. What's the question, Jim? What might have a term in CA?
A term in CA for basically the behavior of the judges, the verbal behavior of the judges described here, a tone which elicits a verbal response. Sorry, a tone which elicits a verbal response.
Well, so it's just adjacency pair, isn't it?
That's what I'm thinking. It's so broad that's any adjacency pairs.
Yeah, yeah. That just needs to be talking about adjacency pair, because where the absence of a response of some kind would be noticeable, and where certain types of responses are more expected than others. The predict of what types of second pair part are expectable in that context. But yeah, I mean, there might be more subtle stuff on what constitutes a question in CA, and that I don't know.
I don't know either.
To be honest, in CA, they'd probably take as much on take up as what was in the first pair part anyway, or and it would be looking at whether there's evidence of discomfort from other participants.
Yeah, by measuring things like pauses and ums and ers and those kind of things.
Yeah. I'm just very aware of my lack of knowledge about CA. It's sort of, because one of my colleagues is, that's kind of more, that's kind of his thing. But he told me, and also those of you, a bit more in the know, he terms it interactional linguistics, and I guess there must be some schism or political reason for that, but I don't know what it is. Don't know. So yeah. I mean, he's quite fond side of stuff, so whether that's to do with it, I don't know. But yeah, that's an aside. But yeah, I'd be interested to know. But yeah, maybe I should just ask him when I can actually see him again.
Yeah. Won't that be nice?
Oh yeah. So I must admit, I've missed my office surprisingly little.
Yeah. Oh yes, I haven't missed the office. Not really.
Yeah, I was surprised by how little I missed actually.
I really thought I would find it, quite difficult, but
I did. But I've been quite happy at home.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I've missed the. It's not the office, not my office per se, but I have really missed the atmosphere, I suppose you'd say.
It's the accidental corridor chats and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
As I said, the water cooler moments. Although, I mean, particularly, even during term time, I could easily not speak to somebody else from the department, even though I've been there in there all day.
Yeah.
Because we all have individual offices and people are behind closed doors.
Oh, leave your door open. That's what I do.
We can't because they obstruct the corridor.
Outwards.
They open outwards, the doors.
Wow.
Blimey.
Yeah, they're very old doors. They're probably 1950s, 60s. So that is problematic.
Have we done with this chapter then, do we think? Anyone? Jim, did you have any more summing up to do?
I wanted to ask people's advice to sort of check whether I have sunk to really unnecessary depths of pedantry.
Almost certainly.
If you could, thank you. If you could go to the bottom of page 264, right?
Sorry, Jim. I love you really.
I walked straight into that. I realised, yeah. At the bottom of page 264, right in the middle of that paragraph, there's a sentence which says, drawing on Goffman's notion of footing, what these judges did was to talk in ways that did that. And I found myself writing, no, they didn't. They didn't draw on Goffman's notion of footing.
I see.
Huh? I mean, am I just...
You know what? I'm constantly pulling the pragmatic students up about... Stop, my phone.
I think you then get into issues of coherence and kind of expectable linkages between things.
Yeah.
I'm actually with you on this one, Jim.
Oh, good.
Shockingly.
Glad to hear. Well, it's interesting. It's interesting.
Our pragmatic students, a talk about not phrasing things like this.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's you as the analyst who drew on that.
Yeah.
The people who made the text.
Yes,
I literally gave them a whole talk on exactly this.
Oh, good. I'm glad you did.
Who knows?
They are a fellow pedant. Yeah. But then I'm looking at it again, I find it interesting because it would be, I think maybe it'd be glaring to everybody if it had said, drawing on Goffman's notion of footing, the judges talked in ways. But because it's what these judges did was, there's a sort of something in there to suggest I am doing interpreting here. The author am doing interpreting. So it's not as glaring, is it?
No.
Yeah, I didn't notice that when
I didn't pick up on it. No, probably because we read it faster.
Yeah. Not with the care and attention that Jim and Liz brought to it.
Jim's a blooming eagle-eyed reader, though. Having been marked by Jim many, many times. You're so good at spotting this stuff.
Now you're giving me away
I feel bad when I don't
chronic
spot it
pedant.
and you do.
Oh, I mean, I comment loads of stuff like this in my students' work, and I'm, probably fairly, but sort of highlighting which and that errors and where they should be using a semicolon rather than a comma.
I love semicolons.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
And sort of whose instead, whose is rather than that's, and that kind of stuff. I do all the time, and this needs to be a matrix clause. If can't stand on its own, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
so, you're a linguistic student, you should know that basic grammar. You have no excuse.
Don't start the sentence with a dependent. This is just a dependent clause.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I get irritated by all that stuff, not knowing what a sentence is, basically. I put it down to, but mate, I was probably the same at that age, to be fair. You forget, we've had years and years of experience of reading and writing stuff, haven't we?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I wonder if it's because they don't read as much. There are some things that they do as well. We're getting into moaning territory here, aren't we? But
we do this a lot, Maria.
just kind of reading the drafts of their dissertations before we broke up for Easter, and they're putting things in the methodology that should be in the literature review and stuff like that, and I'm like, have you never read a research article? It's like, do you not know by now where these things
we actually put old copies of dissertations, some old copies of dissertations up. Oh god, yeah, okay, yeah, well, in which case, I mean, you've done what you can, really, haven't you? Yeah. Anyway, I mean, to be fair, I think when Peter hadn't read my undergraduate dissertation, the letter came back saying, I think you may need some semicolons, and he could have these kind of 20 semicolons within brackets, because I just avoided them because I didn't know how to use them.
Well, that's what I recommend my students to do. That if you don't know how to use them, don't.
You don't have to use them.
Don't use them wrongly. It's better to not use them than to use them wrongly. But anyway, let's stop. We'll stop being pedants. I think it's
one of my. It's not favourite, but
of course we are descriptive linguists, obviously.
Yeah, obviously, yeah, exactly. There's a bit of a.
There was a thread on Twitter the other day which was calling on all linguists to take off their descriptive hat for 1 minute and tell everyone what their pet peeve was. And you
don't even need to take a hat off, you just do it anyway.
I have a pet peeve, right? And I it's the use of however instead of but.
I like however.
And I know, Liz, it's just a prescriptive pet peeve of mine, isn't it? Because people use it all the time, especially in official contexts, instead of...
Is that the idea? You should only use it a sentence initially rather than...
Yes, exactly. That's what I feel. And I feel it's, it's sentence initially because it's a bigger but than but,
I do use that, but only ever between two commas.
Oh, that's different. That's between two commas. That's what do you call it? In apposition. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Is it okay?
But, one of my very frequent comments on student scripts is, new sentence starts here. Use appropriate orthography.
I've had that exact comment from you.
Yeah.
No, I mean, the only one.
Yeah, I mean, it is true though. We do look at our students' work from inevitably, and we forget what our writing was like at that stage in our academic lives.
Yeah, I'm sure mine was terrible when I was that age. Yeah. Yeah, you forget.
So, yeah, exactly. Well, you know.
Yeah. Funny thing is, I can't forget because, like, in my era,